The morning Okonkwo pressed a white envelope-stamped divorce into his wife's hand. On their 9th anniversary, beneath the hard, honest light of Victoria Island's glass towers, he thought he was choosing speed. Beside him, Kemi Balogun waited in an emerald dress, a future shaped like a promise. Executives streamed past with the polite blindness of people who smell a story but won't turn their heads. And across from them, in a red power suit, Adaeze Nwabueze-Okonkwo held a black folder labeled merger files, $90 billion deal, and did not move. He didn't know the night had already given her everything she needed. At 2:13 a.m., signatures bridged London and Lagos, Mauritius and Abuja, folding Crown and Keystone and its largest counterparties into a single governance spine called Zenith Helios. He didn't know the company he climbed, the budgets he praised, the routes he bragged about at dinners, now sat quietly inside a structure Adaeze controlled. He saw a marriage ending. She saw a system aligning. The plaza became a stage of props and posture. The divorce envelope, white and loud. The merger files, black and quiet. Kemi's sunglasses flashed. Toby rehearsed mercy in his tone. You need someone who matches your pace, and asked for the car keys like it was a small thing. Adaeze watched him with a stillness he mistook for surrender. One finger rested on the folder's edge, where a clause could empty a room without raising a voice. What happens when a man trading dead weight for momentum discovers the floor is leased in another name? What does discipline look like when policy, not anger, begins to speak? How far does truth travel once receipts line up with the stories people told themselves? Adaeze learned stillness early. Her mother, Chinyere Nwabueze, built power the quiet way through trusts holding vehicles' nominee boards, teaching a single rule that fit in a whisper: quiet money moves best. When Chinyere died, she left her an empire with one condition: 5 years unseen. Sign Adaeze Nwabueze. Let character announce itself before you ever do. Years earlier, at a charity committee table, Toby's eyes were bright with plans. Ports. APIs. A Lagos where supply chains worked like arteries. He listened when Adaeze asked precise questions. They marry beneath clean chapel light. She shifted the Ikoyi penthouse into Eco Meridian Holdings and let him believe rent bought their view. His rise was neat, analyst to manager to regional director, because headwinds quietly disappeared. A corridor reopened. A gouging supplier found a new owner. Winds looked like talent because they stayed unbroken because she built invisible windbreaks. Then success rounded into entitlement. The jokes arrived: yoga, supportive, not career-minded, followed by the edits. Events without a +1, trips where spouses weren't appropriate. Kemi appeared with immaculate slides and the grammar that makes men feel taller. Underplaced. Underpaid. Almost ready. Flattery knocked. Ambition opened the door. At 10:07 a.m., phones vibrated across Crown and Keystone. Emergency town hall. For PM. Boardroom A locked. The COO wrote big news. The general counsel sent nothing but the link. Toby practiced his listening face in the elevator mirror. Adaeze checked time zones and let the countdown finish. 2 sentences would hand the room a new owner. But before the boardroom, before the badges and the clauses, before the quiet instruments did their work, the story began where all her choices were forged, in Chinyere's lesson, the 5-year vow, and the scaffolding she built for a man who never asked where the calm came from. It began long before this plaza, long before the folder and the envelope. It began with a rule whispered at a kitchen table. Quiet money moves best. The rule was written long before Adaeze ever signed her first document. Quiet money moves best. It was Chinyere Nwabueze's mantra, spoken not like advice, but scripture. Her mother had built Nwabueze's capital from a single export permit in the late 1980s, turning cocoa and palm oil shipments into a silent web of equity stakes, logistics corridors, and offshore vehicles. The empire never roared. It whispered through paperwork and precision. Every success was sealed in silence, every victory disguised as coincidence. Chinyere believed in structure that could survive storms, not visibility, endurance. When she died, the lawyers arrived with a will that felt less like inheritance and more like initiation. Adaeze would inherit everything, subsidiaries, trusts, and layered entities, but with one condition: 5 years of invisibility. For half a decade, she would operate under the alias Adaeze Nwabueze, her identity sealed through proxies and counsel. She could manage the wealth, grow it, and even move markets, but not reveal its source. Chinyer's handwritten note at the end of the will said it all. Power is a mirror, Adaeze. It reflects the person standing closest to it. Hide yours, and you'll see who's real. That single line became her compass. Those early years tested her patience in ways she hadn't imagined. She learned to write emails that sounded deferential, to attend meetings where her name appeared as assistant, to fund decisions without ever being quoted. Through Nwabue's capital's legal labyrinth, she moved capital like wind through corridors. The lawyers said no one had ever handled it with such poise. Adaeze smiled politely. She was only living the discipline she'd been born into. It was during one of those quiet years, her fourth, that she met Toby Okonkwo. The charity committee had gathered in Victoria Island's Civic Center, its glass overlooking the lagoon. Adaeze had come as a donor, anonymous as usual, while Toby represented Crown and Keystone Logistics, a rising import-export firm making noise in corporate circles. He stood out not because he was powerful, but because he wasn't. There was something honest in his ambition, the kind of restless optimism that still believed hard work could bend fortune. His presentation on supply chain reform was imperfect, but full of conviction. He spoke about locally manufactured APIs, bottlenecks at Apapa port, and how better logistics could save billions for West Africa's pharmaceutical trade. When Adaeze asked a question, precise, quiet, unsettlingly detailed, he blinked in surprise before answering, impressed. He thought she was just another wealthy volunteer, dabbling in corporate jargon to sound informed. He didn't know her family office employed more analysts than his entire division. They lingered after the meeting, talking about growth corridors and talent drain. He was passionate. She was measured. In him, Adaeze saw possibility, someone unpolished yet earnest, someone who still believed in systems that worked on merit. In her, Toby saw grace without obvious wealth, a woman he could protect, perhaps guide. They began seeing each other after work. Dinners in small cafes near Falomo, long drives through Lekki when traffic had finally thinned. He admired her calm, the way she listened without trying to impress. He mistook her quiet for simplicity. She let him. Their wedding was intimate, a small chapel filled with light and orchids, her gown simple, her jewelry subtle. No media, no spectacle. Toby's friends said she was low maintenance, the kind of woman who didn't demand luxury. Adaeze smiled through every toast, every compliment that equated modesty with lack. When they moved into the Ikoyi penthouse, Toby believed he'd negotiated an excellent deal through his company housing program. He never asked why the lease didn't bear his name or why payments went through an offshore company called Eco Meridian Holdings. He assumed it was the landlord's way of protecting privacy. He didn't know Adaeze had moved the property there herself, converting family real estate into a test. She wanted to see if he'd ever ask, if curiosity could coexist with humility. He never did. Toby's career bloomed exactly as she'd expected. Crown and Keystone had been expanding aggressively, and Adaeze, through Nwabue's capital's silent investments, had small, untraceable influence across multiple supply chain partners. Not enough to be noticed, but enough to tilt wind in his favor when needed. When a customs corridor in Apapa was abruptly frozen by a competing logistics firm's political maneuvering, Toby was on the verge of losing a multi-million naira shipment contract. Adaeze made one quiet phone call through her mother's old contact in the Ministry of Trade. Within 48 hours, the corridor reopened after regulatory clarification. Toby thought it was luck. When a supplier in Turkey began inflating prices, threatening the margin on Crown and Keystone's biggest deal, Adaeze's investment vehicle quietly acquired the supplier through a chain of holding companies. The next week, prices normalized. Toby bragged about his negotiation skills at a dinner with friends. Adaeze just poured wine and listened, the same way her mother had once listened to men explain her own company to her at conferences. She didn't interfere often, just enough to make sure he never fell hard enough to lose faith in himself. She believed she was helping him grow, building the scaffolding beneath his structure. If the structure was strong, it would stand when the scaffolding came off. But scaffolding is invisible to those standing on it. And what's invisible is easily dismissed. As promotions came, so did the change. Toby began using phrases that scraped her ears. My success, my network, my strategies. He spent more evenings working late, more weekends at team retreats. Adaeze stayed home, monitoring commodity indexes and balance sheets through encrypted channels, running an empire through silence. One evening, after a long day managing legal due diligence for a cross-border acquisition, she found him sprawled on the couch watching a business interview. When she mentioned that she knew the CEO being featured, Toby laughed. Sure, he said, barely glancing up. Maybe one day you'll start working again, Get out of this yoga retreat phase? Adaeze smiled gently, though her chest ached. He's just tired, she told herself. Ambition makes people careless. But the comments didn't stop. At parties, Toby's introductions shifted. This is my wife, Adaeze. She doesn't work, but she's very supportive. At corporate dinners, he ignored her insights on logistics and policy, waving them off as cute. When she corrected a statistic once, politely, his eyes hardened and the conversation moved on without her. He thought she was content being his quiet shadow. He mistook silence for lack of opinion, stillness for absence. The day Crown and Keystone promoted him to regional director, he threw a small celebration in the penthouse. Colleagues came, glasses clinked, Kemi from strategic partnerships flirted in the corner with effortless confidence. Adaeze watched the dynamic from the balcony. The way people orbited him now, the way flattery disguised itself as friendship. She could almost hear her mother's voice whispering, "Watch who changes when power enters the room." Toby raised his glass for a toast. "To new heights," he said. Adaeze raised hers too. "To strong foundations," she whispered. He didn't catch it. Months passed. The scaffolding still held, though cracks had begun forming in what it supported. Adaeze started noticing the subtle signs of distance. The phone face down, the perfume not hers, the new passwords on his laptop. She didn't hire a private investigator yet. She didn't need to. The numbers told their own story. Toby's travel claims grew erratic, hotel receipts misaligned with meeting schedules. She said nothing. Instead, she redirected her focus toward Helios Continental, a distressed European healthcare conglomerate seeking buyers for its African assets. To the outside world, it was just another rumor. To Adaeze, it was a hinge, the kind of deal that could shift entire industries. If she could integrate Helios patents with Zenith Pharmaceuticals and Crown and Keystone's logistics infrastructure, the result would be a continental corridor for life sciences. She began calling old partners from Chinyer's era, fund managers in London, policy advisors in Abuja, trustees in Mauritius. Every conversation was threaded through secrecy, every signature routed through the Adaeze Nwabueze alias. Meanwhile, Toby grew louder. He spoke of breaking ceilings, of being shortlisted for executive succession. He started treating their home like a waiting room for his next life. Adaeze began sleeping less. Not from stress, but from acceleration. At night, when Lagos quieted to its hum of generators and distant sirens, she drafted clauses, structured term sheets, and redlined indemnities while he slept beside her, dreaming of promotions she was underwriting in silence. The irony became its own kind of poetry. By her 5th year of anonymity, Nwabue's capital had grown from a family office into a holding architecture connecting 5 countries. Adaeze's signature, Adaeze Nwabueze, appeared on nearly every major deal in West African logistics, but no one knew her face. The discipline was exhausting but liberating. She had learned that true influence didn't need applause, it needed results. Toby's behavior had become predictable now. Every achievement hardened into self-congratulation, every compliment from peers inflated into prophecy. He began describing himself as a self-made strategist. The irony didn't sting anymore. It clarified her mother's wisdom. Power reveals character. hidden power reveals truth. And now, after 5 years of silence, the truth was fully revealed. She could see exactly who her husband had become. The Helios whisper arrived on a humid Tuesday evening. Adaeze was at her private office, a minimalist suite tucked inside a corporate tower no one associated with her. The message came through a secure line. Helios Continental is collapsing. Debt overhang. Asset rich, cash poor. They're seeking acquisition proposals within 30 days. Her pulse didn't quicken. It stabilized. This was the test's conclusion. If she could close this deal under Adaeze Nwabueze, she would have fulfilled her mother's final condition and proven that stillness didn't mean stagnation. The Zenith-Helios merger would tie together everything she'd built quietly: logistics, pharmaceuticals, and global credibility. She stood by the window, watching the lagoon darken under storm clouds. Below, traffic pulsed like veins carrying ambition through concrete. Somewhere in that maze, Toby was probably laughing over drinks with Kemi, believing the universe bent for him. Adaeze smiled faintly. The scaffolding was about to come off. And soon, everyone would see what remained standing. Kemi Balogun entered Crown and Keystone like a new language, one spoken in confidence, dressed in emerald, and sharpened by ambition. She was 28, with a strategist's eyes and a marketer's smile. Her reports didn't just track performance, they mapped power. In meetings, she spoke in fluent hierarchy, every sentence calibrated to flatter the right listener and challenge the wrong one. Within weeks, she had learned who nodded when the right family name was mentioned, who leaked board gossip before it was official, and which chairman's nephew could expedite procurement after 5 p.m. She didn't rise by accident. She dissected the org chart like anatomy. To her, every dotted line was a nerve, every department a potential artery to influence. The men called her efficient. The women called her dangerous. Both were right. Toby Okonkwo met her at a strategy retreat in Ape. She approached him during lunch. No pretense, no flattery yet, just questions that hinted at deeper study. Why is Crown still routing through Marseille when Tima's customs clearance dropped by 18% last quarter? She'd asked, eyes holding his like a mirror. He laughed, impressed, explaining logistical complexities. She listened like someone learning a religion she intended to surpass. That night, he couldn't stop thinking about her precision. 2 weeks later, she transferred into his division for better synergy. HR called it restructuring. Everyone else knew it was design. Toby's transformation had already begun before Kemi arrived, but she gave it grammar. He'd grown accustomed to Adaeze's quiet, mistaking her calm for disengagement. When he spoke, she listened. When he faltered, she fixed it without showing her hand. It was a rhythm that made him feel larger, like the world existed to confirm his growing importance. The micro-dismissals started as jokes, harmless, he told himself. Yoga and brunch again today. He'd tease when she declined a last-minute event. She's supportive, he'd tell colleagues. Not really career-minded, but solid. At dinners, he'd introduce her as the backbone of the family while talking over her insights about trade reforms. When she mentioned portfolio diversification, he'd pat her hand lightly, saying, "You've been reading my reports again, haven't you?" The tone wasn't cruelty. It was possession, the kind that grows where gratitude dies. Soon, he started attending events without her. Spouses aren't really part of this one, he'd say, adjusting his cufflinks. Networking is smoother when it's just executives. Adaeze would nod, never protesting, her silence now a mirror he refused to look into. She was learning something her mother never had to teach her: the anatomy of arrogance. Kemi watched the pattern like a scientist observing a specimen. She saw the subtle cracks in Toby's confidence, where validation had to be fed daily to stay alive. She learned his rhythms quickly. The exact tone of voice that made him feel brilliant, the angle of admiration that disguised direction. "You're underplaced," she told him once, quietly but firmly. He looked up. "What do you mean?" "You're doing a regional director's work with a manager's title. And everyone knows it." He stared at her, unsure if it was flattery or prophecy. She smiled just enough to make it both. In the weeks that followed, her praise became an algorithm. Each compliment carried a hidden key. She told him he was boardroom material, that he had executive tempo, that his wife was lovely, but not wired for the pace you move at. Flattery is the most efficient currency in any corporate exchange, and Kemi was fluent. By the time she invited him to after-hours brainstorm sessions, Toby was already rehearsing a version of his life, where she was the future and Adaeze was the past. While Toby was busy mistaking attention for ascension, Adaeze was awake in the hours when power actually moved. From London to Mauritius to Abuja, her nights became a map of calls and clauses. The Helios Continental opportunity had accelerated faster than expected. The distressed European conglomerate was desperate, its African assets bleeding value, its patents gathering dust. But Adaeze saw pattern in collapse. She didn't chase deals. She built ecosystems. At 11:47 p.m., she was on a secure call with a London hedge director finalizing a bridge facility through Nwabue's capital's Luxembourg arm. At 1:12 a.m., she spoke with counsel in Mauritius to establish a cross-border trust for regulatory shielding. At 3:04 a.m., Abuja came online, policy contacts aligning fiscal incentives for foreign integration. By dawn, term sheets were converging like tributaries into a single current. From her glass office overlooking the Lagos Lagoon, Adaeze watched the city glow awake. She'd spent 5 years in disciplined anonymity, building, testing, hiding. And now the architecture was ready. When her legal team sent the final draft of the Zenith-Helios merger, she reviewed every clause herself. Not one comma out of place. The test is over, she thought. It's time for light. At home, Toby barely noticed her sleepless nights. He assumed she was reading, meditating, or indulging some quiet hobby. He was too busy rehearsing his next act. Kemi had convinced him to prepare for transition. She whispered of executives being groomed, of succession plans waiting for the right internal candidate. He believed her because belief is how arrogance disguises need. He began copying her language in meetings, phrases like strategic elasticity, market harmonization, stakeholder velocity. The board noticed. His superiors applauded his growth. Adaeze noticed too, but she said nothing. Watching him quote frameworks she'd helped fund through silent subsidiaries was almost poetic. Her mother had always warned her, some people mistake proximity to power for ownership of it. One humid Friday, Adaeze stood in her office as her counsel confirmed. All parties have executed. The merger is closed. Value: $90 billion. Her hand didn't tremble. She simply nodded, thanked the team, and ended the call. Across 3 continents, servers are updated. By 2:13 a.m., global news wires cued embargoed releases. Nwabue's capital merges with Helios Continental. Zenith Helios Holdings formed. West Africa's largest life sciences merger closed. Adaeze sat back, the glow from her laptop reflecting on her calm face. The ink on her 5-year test had dried. She opened her window blinds. The lagoon shimmered silver under early light. Traffic murmured below like a heartbeat. Somewhere out there, Toby was probably dreaming of promotions that no longer belonged to him. She whispered her mother's mantra one last time. Quiet money moves best. And then, she scheduled the one thing that would make all the noise she'd been saving. Emergency town hall, 4 p.m., boardroom A locked. By mid-morning, Toby arrived at Crown and Keystone with a new brightness in his step. He decided to stop pretending humility. Kemi had spent the previous night reminding him he was too brilliant to stay invisible. They stood together by the elevator, her hand on his arm, their reflections merging in the chrome doors. She looked the part, emerald dress, sleek hair, a bag that could buy a small car. He looked ready, new watch, new cologne, the posture of a man convinced his future was guaranteed. This is the beginning, Kemi whispered as the elevator doors opened. He smiled. It already began. They spent the day drafting plans, discussing reorganization, and speculating about promotions. Every colleague who passed by saw them as a rising duo, the bold and the brilliant, perfectly aligned. When the calendar ping came through the executive channel, Toby's phone vibrated first. Emergency town hall, 4 p.m., boardroom A/stream link attached. Hosted by Adaeze Nwabueze, strategic consolidation led. He frowned briefly. Nwabueze? Who's that? Kemi shrugged. Some consultant, maybe. Must be merger-related. He smiled again, satisfied. Mergers meant change, and change meant opportunity. At that same moment, Adaeze stood in front of the mirror in her private suite, fastening the last button of her red suit. The one she'd saved for endings. And beginnings. Her black folder, embossed with gold letters, merger files, $90 billion deal, rested on the desk beside her. The city outside was blindingly bright. Lagos had never looked cleaner, sharper, or more honest. She picked up her phone, scanned the boardroom confirmation, and felt a quiet stillness settle over her. Toby and Kemi were already moving boxes into their new Lekki apartment. Bare walls, fresh paint, the scent of beginnings that don't know what they're ending. Adaeze didn't watch them leave. She didn't need to. At 3:58 p.m., she entered boardroom A. At 4 o'clock, her calendar locked. And at 4:01, power changed grammar. At exactly 4 p.m., the doors to boardroom A closed with a soft hydraulic sigh reserved for moments that divide before and after. The room smelled of polished oak and expensive restraint, pale wood table, clean steel fixtures, Lagos skyline framed beyond floor-to-ceiling glass. The city outside shimmered in late daylight, sharp enough to cut reflection from truth. Executives filled the room in a choreography of quiet wealth. No one spoke above a murmur. Watches gleamed. Fountain pens tapped once against leather folders. The general counsel sat at the far end, scrolling through documents he'd been instructed not to open early. The chief financial officer whispered something to the COO, who only nodded, eyes fixed on the vacant seat at the head of the table. The seat everyone assumed was for the incoming consultant, Adaeze Nwabueze, the strategist behind the rumored merger. Then the door opened again. She entered. Adaeze Nwabueze-Okonkwo, or rather, Adaeze Nwabueze, walked into the room in a slate-gray suit that fit like punctuation. No one moved at first. It was the stillness of comprehension arriving too late. They had seen her before, at corporate dinners, quiet beside Toby, the polite housewife, the woman who never joined side conversations. Now she stood at the head of the table. Every line of her posture carried authorship. "Good afternoon," she said, voice low, deliberate, balanced between steel and silk. The general counsel blinked once, his lips parting just enough to form the syllable that would become office legend. "Madam?" Adaeze placed a slim black folder on the table. Its gold embossing caught the light. Zenith Helios Holdings. She opened it with a quiet precision that silenced even the air conditioning hum. "Some of you know me as Adaeze Nwabueze," she began. "Most of you, not at all. As of 2:13 a.m., Nwabue's Capital and Helios Continental have finalized a strategic consolidation under the Zenith Helios banner. This entity now holds controlling stakes in Crown and Keystone Logistics and 4 of its primary counterparties across West Africa and the EU. A pause. A single heartbeat where disbelief became confirmation. The CFO leaned forward, fingers tightening on his Mont Blanc. "You mean majority stakes?" Adaeze's eyes flicked toward him. "Steady. Controlling, not majority. There's a difference. One writes policy. The other follows it." A low murmur rippled through the room, soft, incredulous, expensive. Toby sat near the center of the table, still in the tailored confidence of the man who thought this meeting would open a new chapter of his career.
His throat went dry.
He hadn't looked up when she entered, hadn't recognized her silhouette against the glass. Now, slowly, he did. For a fleeting second, time folded in on itself. The breakfast table, the white envelope, the emerald dress, waiting by the door. Every assumption detonated quietly in his chest. Adaeze didn't look at him yet. She clicked to the first slide on the projector. The title appeared in calm, unambiguous font. Governance Realignment. Conflict Remediation. Conduct Review. 3 bullets. each one a verdict waiting for a name. She spoke without rush, the cadence of someone reading from a language she had written herself. The consolidation requires structural realignment to ensure transparency across all verticals. Effective immediately, all executive positions will undergo review for compliance with Zenith Helios corporate conduct policy. A junior VP raised his hand, voice tentative. Madam, sorry, Chair, does that mean board oversight changes? Adaeze smiled faintly, not kindly. It means clarity, Mr. Abiola. Oversight will now flow through Zenith Helios governance framework. That includes you. She clicked to the next slide. Logos of Crown and Keystone, Helios Continental, and 4 European counterparties appeared, arranged in concentric rings. At the center sat the Zenith Helios insignia, a subtle Z folded into a compass. This, she continued, is now one ecosystem. Logistics, pharma, infrastructure, capital. Efficiency through unity. Every decision, every expense, every appointment from this day forward aligns under Zenith governance. Toby felt heat crawling up his neck. The language, ecosystem, governance, unification were phrases he'd heard her use at home, in passing, when he still pretended to listen. He used to laugh at them, call them theoretical talk. Now the same words were rewriting the walls around him. The room began to shift tone. The senior executives who had once viewed him as a rising insider now stole cautious glances in Adaeze's direction. Hierarchies rearranged themselves in silence. Even Kemi, seated 2 chairs away, straightened her posture. Her expression stayed neutral, but her pulse betrayed calculation. She had studied power enough to recognize its grammar, and the syntax had just changed. Adaeze advanced to the next slide. In light of recent internal assessments, she said, Zenith Helios will review all internal relationships that may constitute potential conflicts of interest. This includes personal affiliations affecting decision-making within the procurement and partnerships. The words landed like stones dropped into still water. Every pair of eyes flicked toward Toby and Kemi. Adaeze didn't name them. She didn't have to. Her gaze remained on the slide, her tone still professional, the perfect balance between policy and precision. Integrity, she said softly, is not optional at this level of capital alignment. The General Counsel cleared his throat. Understood, Madam Chair. We'll coordinate with HR for declarations. Adaeze nodded once.
Norus.
Documentation will arrive before close of business. Outside, the afternoon light had begun to tilt, sharp rays carving golden edges along the glass walls. Inside, the temperature felt cooler, the air thinner. Toby's mind ran in circles, searching for an anchor. He wanted to interrupt, to remind them of his metrics, his record, his loyalty. But the vocabulary of defense doesn't work in the language of ownership. Every word Adaeze spoke was measured, unhurried, irreversible. She clicked the final slide. Moving forward, she said, executive behavior under previous management will be evaluated against Zenith Helios ethical framework. This isn't retroactive punishment. It's alignment. Some practices tolerated under Crown and Keystone are incompatible with our governance model. No one asked what practices. They didn't need to. The implication was sufficient oxygen for discomfort to spread. Adaeze closed her laptop gently, signaling an end that felt ceremonial. Our vision is continuity through reform, she concluded. We don't erase what existed, we evolve it. Silence. Then the CFO stood, slow and deliberate. On behalf of this board, Chair Nwabueze, welcome. The room echoed with polite applause, restrained and careful. No one wanted to clap too loudly or too little. Adaeze inclined her head. Thank you. You'll all receive correspondence tonight outlining transitional steps. She gathered her papers, tucking them neatly into her folder. Her movements were precise, rhythmic, rituals of control performed in daylight. Then she turned toward the General Counsel. Mr. Daramola, before we adjourn, would you please brief the team on the final clause? He nodded, clearing his throat as he flipped through a document thick with legal bookmarks. Of course, Madam Chair. He paused long enough for everyone to lean forward. His tone changed, formal, almost reverent. Section 14, he read, clawbacks and rescission rights. In the event of misconduct, financial impropriety, or ethical breach by any executive under legacy contracts, Zenith Helios reserves the right to reclaim bonuses, rescind share grants, and revoke directorship privileges retroactively for up to 7 years. Supporting documents will follow tonight. The room went utterly still. Adaeze smiled, not in triumph, but in completion.
"Thank you," she said simply.
She gathered her folder, stood, and walked toward the door. As she passed behind Toby, her shadow stretched across his notes like an underline. He didn't look up.
She didn't stop.
Outside the boardroom, the light was brighter than before, honest, unfiltered, stainless. And behind her, Section 14 had just begun to breathe. Morning came not with noise, but with precision. The world inside Zenith Helios Holdings moved like a spreadsheet come alive, columns, timestamps, and signatures forming the geometry of consequence. By 8 a.m., compliance had become the most powerful department in Lagos. Its conference table, once ignored between audits, now served as a quiet tribunal. No one raised their voice. They didn't need to. Numbers were louder. Receipts don't blink, Adaeze had once said to her general counsel, and today, that phrase became a method. Stacks of matched documentation lined the room. Not accusation, just alignment. First, travel reports. Crown and Keystone System listed 6 logistics conferences attended by Regional Director Toby Okonkwo, each approved for strategic expansion. But flight itineraries didn't match conference dates. Hotel records showed bookings for 2. The expense claims cited networking dinners at restaurants where table reservations bore Kemi Balogun's initials. Next, enterprise chat logs. Extracted under Zenith Helios Data Integrity Clause. Messages between Toby and Kemi, corporate channels, mid-level flirtation coded as brainstorming. We should align after hours, one read. Another. Off-site synergy best explored in person winking-faced. No scandalous language. Just enough to reveal proximity where governance forbade it. Then procurement trails. Kemi's digital footprint mapped directly onto Crown and Keystone's favor flow. Vendor approvals expedited within 24 hours of her login. Supplier selections adjusted minutes after her sessions with Toby ended. No money missing, but intent visible. Influence quantified. The head of compliance, a quiet man who never drank at office parties, narrated findings like minutes of a meeting, calm, exact, irreversible. Under Section 14, these correspondences indicate dual conflict conduct, he said, clicking through slides that mirrored betrayal in high-resolution detail. Procurement bias, non-disclosure of relationship, and use of company assets for personal benefit. Supporting documents validated. No one interrupted. At the end of the table, Adaeze listened. Expression unreadable. Her pen never moved, yet every sentence seemed to answer to her rhythm. At 9:17 a.m., HR arrived. 2 envelopes, one green, one white. Deactivation notices. No security guards, no theatrics. Just procedure. Kemi's ID badge flickered red on the reader. Her access froze mid-swipe. The HR representative collected her laptop, phone, and company car keys. Her eyes stayed dry, her smile mechanical, half shock, half survival instinct. Toby's turn came next. He still believed there was a misunderstanding, that some chain of command could be appealed. He asked for clarification. Of course, HR replied, tone clinical. Please read your exit summary. The words blurred as he scanned them. Conflict of interest, breach of policy, governance violation. His mouth opened, but the room didn't wait for sound. His badge light went out with a single tone, small and final.
No shouting. No spectacle.
Only policy. Adaeze never spoke. She simply raised her eyes once, signaling that the process could continue. When the meeting ended, the executives dispersed in silence, the air thick with the kind of respect that grows from fear. Kemi stood near the hallway, clutching her bag like it still contained leverage. Her emerald dress from that first conference, now looked like armor that forgot its purpose. "Madam," she began, voice trembling, "this is personal, isn't it?" Adeeze's tone was even, almost kind.
No.
"It's structural." Kemi blinked. "You can't. Governance doesn't argue," Adaeze said, turning away. "It corrects." The words weren't cruel. They were architectural. Toby remained seated after the others left, his palms pressed flat against the conference table, the same pale oak that had once reflected his reflection like a mirror. Now it reflected nothing back. For the first time, he saw the invisible scaffolding, the network of favors, the quiet corrections, the obstacles that had disappeared just before he reached them. Every promotion, every victory, every win that once felt earned now flickered like a memory doctored by hindsight. He remembered the customs freeze that lifted overnight, the supplier who miraculously lowered prices, the corridor that reopened after one phone call. Coincidences, he had thought. Providence, maybe.
No.
They had been her. Every rung on his ladder had been reinforced by Adeeze's unseen hand. And when he kicked that hand away, the structure stayed standing just long enough for him to climb one more step so that the fall would be his own. He buried his face in his palms, the soundless kind of despair that only realization brings. By noon, Lagos gleamed outside the boardroom's glass. Traffic shimmered along Ozumbambaju, horns muted by insulation and altitude. Inside, Adeeze reviewed post-meeting documents with quiet precision. Her assistant slid a folder toward her. Termination confirmations, compliance logs, Section 14 execution notes. Every receipt is signed. Every clause fulfilled. No argument could survive what was written. Paper was the cleanest weapon. She signed 3 more lines, closed the folder, and handed it back. "Distribute copies to legal, HR, and treasury," she said. "And file digital duplicates under Zenith governance." "Yes, Madam Chair." Adeeze leaned back, eyes tracing the city's skyline, the mirrored towers, the cranes, the world that had once treated her as background noise. She didn't feel triumph, only order. Her mother's voice seemed to echo faintly from memory. "Quiet money moves best, but when it speaks, it should only speak once." Outside her office, Toby waited. No longer regional director, no longer anything at all, but still dressed in the residue of authority, a suit that fit yesterday's life. She paused before him, hands folded around the black folder that had orchestrated his undoing. "Why?" he asked, his voice hollow, brittle. "You could have told me." Adeeze's eyes softened, not pity, just recognition. "You would have heard ambition, not truth." He swallowed hard. "I didn't know." "No," she said quietly. "You didn't ask." That was the real verdict. 5 years condensed into 4 words. She walked past him, her heels clicking like clock hands closing an hour. He stayed in the hallway long after she'd gone, staring at the security desk where his badge no longer worked. The receptionist avoided his eyes. He felt the city hum around him. Buses, calls, footsteps, all belonging to people who still had places to be.
He didn't.
At 5:42 p.m., Toby sat in the parking lot, car engine off, phone buzzing with the last of his official notifications. His inbox flooded with administrative finalities, deactivation notices, severance outlines, access revocations. One email stood out, subject line plain, unadorned. From Eco Meridian Holdings. Subject: Lease termination notice. Effective immediately. He opened it. "Dear Mr. Okonkwo, this is to formally notify you that your tenancy agreement at Ikoyi Penthouse, Unit 17B, has been terminated under Clause 9A, Ownership Recall Provision. You are hereby granted a 24-hour window to retrieve personal effects, after which property management will assume possession. Regards."
Eco Meridian Holding Ltd.
He read it twice before it clicked. Eco Meridian Holdings. The name sounded familiar, harmless even. It took a full minute before he remembered, the company that owned their penthouse. Adeeze had mentioned it once, years ago, in passing. He never asked again. Now the walls of his life were closing under a name that had always belonged to her. He looked around the parking lot. The sunlight fading, the sky turning copper, and realized that the empire he thought he was climbing had never been his to begin with. He had only been a tenant, not just in the penthouse, but in power itself. His phone slipped from his hand and hit the car floor with a hollow thud. In the distance, somewhere high above the city, a new email pinged in Adeeze's inbox confirming final transfer of governance rights. Policy.
Paper.
Precision.
No shouting. No vengeance.
Just receipts that didn't blink. And by morning, the locks at Ikoyi would change.